Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another game theory reaction, and man, here we go. Their game theory's throwing their hat in the ring, so to speak. Today's video is The Legend of Deltarune is a lie. So, on top of all of that, if I remember correctly, so if I go, the thumbnail, I think, said something about... Okay, yeah, so one of the thumbnails they have running on the video right now is One Must Die, but the thumbnail that I saw, it says not a hero and a picture of Susie. So that tells me a couple of things about what this video could be about. Obviously, you know, it's about the prophecy, given, you know, the Legend of Deltarune is a lie. And this could be talking about the whole thing that, like, the theory that's been going around about the fact that Susie may not be one of the heroes of the legend. And, you know, and that including, you know, the fact that Susie and Rousey saw the last section of the prophecy, and apparently it wasn't that good. But yeah, I've seen a couple of people commenting on my other videos talking about how, like, or questioning how, like, Susie couldn't be the hero of the legend, and it mainly boils down to the fact that, well, there's a couple of things, really. If you remember in the beginning of the game, the version of the prophecy that Rousey tells Susie and Chris when they enter, it very much shows, it very much depicts the silhouette of Susie herself. But then when we actually get to the prophecy itself in Chapter 4, the silhouette of the girl is very indistinct. On top of that, the girl in the pictures seems to be wielding a sword, which, if you've played the game, Susie doesn't wield swords, she wields axes. Normally, only Chris wields swords, but, and I can't remember where I saw this, but if you, like, alter the save and have, like, put Noelle in the party, she can equip swords as well, on top of, like, the magic rings. So there's something obviously going on there. And then on top of all that, you also have my personal theory that I'm kind of working through right now, where it seems like the knight and who's ever working with them are trying to, like, skirt around the prophecy or make it play out to their benefit somehow, whatever their end goals actually are. Because Rousey has said that whenever broken, you know, even that you can't really break the prophecy. It's going to happen. And given the fact that we've literally seen everything going up to this point actually happen in the prophecy, I'm kind of tempted to believe that. But at the same time, things are being kind of bent out of shape but not outright broken, like the human who was a cage made of human parts. Originally, I would assume that would have meant our goner that we were making at the beginning of the game, but then that was thrown out and we were put into Chris, who is, you know, a cage made of human parts in this context, because they're literally trapping us. Or maybe they're also talking about the cage in Chris's bedroom, which, I mean, that's just rather literal. And Susie is a girl, even if she's not meant to be the hero. But man, like, just the idea of what could happen if, or when, depending, Susie discovers she's not the girl in the prophecy, which might actually, you know, make sense given how, like, all of Susie's character at this point in the game seems very much to be, you know, not playing by the rules. I mean, again, Chapter 1, she's not with us for a good portion of the chapter, and we have to actively, like, warn enemies to stop her from hurting them. Then in Chapter 2, she, you know, she gets her own action, along with forcing Rousey to have his or own reaction, so Chris isn't the only one doing acting. She goes off on her own. She's very independent, and that seems to be affecting literally everything. Like, it's like, honestly, it's funny. Like, Noelle has the whole thing where she's very good at finding glitches in video games and breaking them and stuff like that. And we've always joked that that might have something, you know, to do with Des being, you know, the knight, or the fact that she lives in a world that is a video game, you know, have something to do with that. But Susie seems to be the one that's actively breaking, quote-unquote, the rules of the game. So, given that she might not be the hero of the prophecy, that might have something to do with it. We don't know. But yeah, we should probably get this thing started. So yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my film theory reaction. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because almost 3/4 of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed, and my main goal for this year is to hopefully hit 10,000 subscribers, and I mean, definitely gonna have to see if that's possible. But with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
A portion of today's episode is sponsored by WB Games.
Only
The
a portion?
legend of the Deltarune is alive. Many of the characters we've fallen in love with actually play very different roles than we originally thought. And now it's time to reveal the truth. The truth about our heroes, their greatest enemy, and the legend of the Deltarune itself.
Here we go.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that promises to give the new Pope Leo a copy of Deltarune if given the chance. But if I'm bringing up that dead meme, that can only mean one thing. Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 have finally arrived, and I have been dying to get stuck into these new installments of the story, have some questions answered from previous chapters, and as always, try to solve the new questions these chapters present. And there is a lot to discuss, my friends. We're going to be uncovering the true identities of some familiar characters and what their roles are within Deltarune, learning that the things we thought to be set in stone may not actually be true anymore. Seems to be a running theme on this channel recently. And of course, figuring out what it all means for the future of this franchise. So gulp down that juice, theorists. It's time to open up a dark fountain and dive back into the world of Deltarune. It's been almost 4 years since Chapter 2 was released, and over a year since our last video on it. So before we get too deep into this dark world, let me give you a quick recap. Deltarune is the spiritual successor to the wildly popular indie RPG Undertale, a game where every small decision you made, from defeating enemies to how you spoke to characters, completely altered the outcome of the game. Deltarune, however, works a little bit differently. There aren't multiple paths you can take that lead to different endings. Characters aren't killed, but instead the battles end after a certain amount of damage is made and you spare them. The whole theme of this game is that your choices don't matter.
Okay, what was going on? So, no, you still, act and spare and recruit and stuff like that. It's just that if you attack them, they run away. That's...
Over the last 2 chapters, we met Chris, a quiet individual who explores places called the Dark Worlds with former bully Susie. During these adventures, they meet Rolze, a creature from the Dark World who wants Chris to fulfill the legend of the Deltarune. This prophecy was that 3 heroes, a human, a monster, and a prince from the dark, would seal the dark fountains and banish the angels' heaven. Again, highlighting the idea that their destinies are set. They cannot be changed. And even if you try to force a change, like you can in Chapter 2, where you do a genocide-like run, making your friendly neighbor Noel freeze enemies to death, it still doesn't change the outcome. It only affects how you got there and how Noel behaves. Not exactly what people were expecting when the game first came out, but something you can do to affect the outcome of this channel is hitting that subscribe button. We're actually on our way to hitting 20 million subscribers, and we're planning something really special for when we hit it. But if you want to find out what that is, you gotta hit that button. If you're skilled enough, that is. Oh, wow, you actually did it. I'd better get to planning then. But in the meantime, let's chat about Chapter 3, because we are met with a similar linear path to the previous chapters. In Chapter 3, we travel through the Dark World opened by Chris at the end of Chapter 2, where we take on Tenna, the TV set that has been forgotten. Tenna has Chris's mother Toriel imprisoned under the instruction of the Knight. This is a character we have been waiting to hear more about from the first few chapters. They are a big part of the legend of the Deltarune, being the one who is trying to bring around the Roaring, an apocalyptic event that will doom everyone. And by the end of Chapter 3, the Knight shows themselves, defeating our heroes and fleeing to a bunker in town with poor Undyne in tow. Chris and Susie discover that there is a code into this bunker, but they believe they have to get it from the mayor, Noel's mother. This is where Chapter
God, even after all the time that the game's actually been out, it's still I'm still not mentally all there, and the fact that we have an actual official sprite for Mayor Holiday now. Honestly, after so many years and so many different fan designs, we actually have something here, and it still somewhat shocks me.
Chapter 4 kicks off. Susie and Chris invite themselves over to Noel's to snoop. After finding part of the code, a new dark fountain is formed at the church nearby.
Part of the code, it's pretty obvious at this point, it's 12/25. The holidays are all Christmas themed, so of course it would be, the 25th of December.
Susie and Chris enter and begin to learn about the prophecy of the Deltarune. Once again, Chris seals the Dark Fountain after going up against the Roaring Knight and the Titan that they summon, a sign of the roaring that is to come. And you know what? Let's talk about the Roaring Knight for a minute. For a long time, their identity has been a mystery hanging over this community. Could it be Father Alvin? He seemed mighty suspicious. Was it really Chris because they opened a Dark Fountain at the end of chapter 2? Well, finally, we've gotten to see the Roaring Knight in the flesh, or darkness, and it's clearly not Chris. Would be pretty tricky to fight against yourself. But then, who is it? Well, the first major clue we get is that the Knight isn't like other Darkness. Ralsei has made it clear over various chapters that Darkness cannot leave the Dark World because they aren't really real like Chris and Susie are. They just exist as playing cards, toys, objects that take on new meaning in the shadows. But after you defeat, or more likely lose, to the Roaring Knight, he runs away to the world of light and is able to exist inside the bunker, implying that this Knight isn't a Darkener, but a Lightener like Chris and Susie that is able to exist in both worlds.
I mean, rather basic information there, but I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. But everybody's assuming it's Des, Noelle's missing sister, or also potentially her mother, Carol, mainly because of, the antlers. But also there's the whole fact, again, for anybody watching this who isn't deep into, Deltarune, when you first fight the Knight, like, they do all sorts of weird stuff. Like, you saw them, they're floating, and we've never seen any Lighteners, with this kind of power. And also the fact that when they roar, they're kind of like their chest opens up like a rib cage, their helmet kind of splits open like a deer skull. So they're not a normal Lightener. There's something going on there, and that's why everybody's kind of assuming it's Des, because again, she's been missing for literally years at this point. And there's also like unused dialogue hidden in the game's code that might hint towards the fact that she might have been like trapped in the game's code itself, if that dialogue's actually from her in the first place. And also just as a side note of a side note of a side note here, Andrew Cunningham, really good Deltarune theorist, his most recent video he's made talking about kind of like the conspiracy theory web of people connected to the Knight kind of points out that the Knight might not be working alone, because it's revealed if you actually during like your fight with the Knight, if you fight them well enough, and a couple of other interactions in chapter 4, that Chris seems to be working with the Knight. Like when you're fighting the Knight, if you choose to attack them, Chris does much less damage than everyone else. Like he's holding back, they're purposely holding back. And also, there's a funny thing near the end of the battle. If you do a no-hit run, specifically Chris coughs, and the Knight kind of like tilts their head, kind of like, what? Because Chris knows, because Chris is separate from the soul, we're kind of possessing them, that they're kind of warning the Knight, like, hey, the player's too good, we gotta end this. If I remember, I'll link to my reaction of Andrew's video in like the top corner of the video. But yeah, it's one of those things that once you if you're good enough, like, you can kind of imagine in world that Chris is freaking out. It's like, oh god, they're actually good at this.
And with this being a Lightener, we should also be able to take a look at their physical appearance to narrow it down more. Chris and Susie still look like themselves in the Dark World, so it's likely there will be some similarities between the Knight and their Lightener form. Starting with the head. It's clear that this Roaring Knight has antlers. Other than making him look pretty cool, this connects the Roaring Knight specifically to Noelle and her family, the Holidays, a family of reindeer. Immediately, my mind went to Carol, Noelle's mother. She seemed pretty evil so far, with her red text talking directly to the player and her neglectful treatment of Noelle. She even has a katana on the wall which would fit the Knight's sword. But when I looked more closely at the Knight's sword, something else caught my attention. When they hold it upright, we can see that the bottom has a flat edge. If this were a katana or any other traditional sword, that flat part in the pixel art would be higher up to act as a guard for the hand. But this one is at the bottom. Plus, if you take a look at the top of the sword, it's more rounded than it is pointy. The pose almost reminds me of when I was a kid and how I tried to balance a baseball bat in my hand. Wait, in previous chapters, Noelle recalls how her older sister Des would hit Chris with a wiffle bat if they were lying. And we know that taking items into the dark world transforms them, like our sword really just being a pencil. Des is also the only member of the family we haven't met yet. We actually know very little about Des, other than her full name is December, keeping with the holiday theme, she is no longer around, and weirdly, that she's left-handed, based on her mouse being on the left side of her computer.
Right, yeah.
And wouldn't you know it, the knight also wields their sword in their left hand. But there's more than a wiffle bat sword that connects the Roaring Knight to Des. When trying to look for the code to the bunker, Chris enters Des's room and finds Des's guitar. That guitar has shown up once before during the Spamtum Sweepstakes ARG that happened a few years ago. Players found a web link called deltarune.com/Des. By going to that webpage and clicking on the guitar, it plays a song called findher.ogg. This musical motif is...
You know, I just gotta pause here, just for like a personal moment, really. Mainly because, like, I am so used to, you know, listening to, like, Deltarune stuff from other theorists, and, like, game theory being, like, basically everything else, that having, like, listening to them actually talk about, you know, Deltarune stuff that is kind of surreal, even if it is, like, really basic information that other theorists have gone over, like a million times, basically. I know, you know, with that being said, I know that this video is potentially being used as sort of like a ground floor to catch people up who have no idea what's going on in Deltarune. You know, gotta always go for the lowest common denominator there. But still, it's still really weird.
Is also present in the Roaring Knights theme song. The music in this game is exceptional. Toby Fox is a fantastic composer, and so to make a song with such a similar motif cannot be a mere coincidence.
Again, many videos have been made comparing motifs. Another one, going back to Andrew Cunningham, my first reaction to one of his videos talking about the Gaster motifs that appear in other Deltarune songs. Granted, you know, it's a couple of years old and doesn't include anything from chapters 3 or 4, but it's still a very good video. Again, if I remember to do it, I'll do like a link in the corner of the video.
Especially when in chapter 3, there is a slot machine where you can enter as many points as you like to get a prize. And if you choose to spend 1,225 points, a strange room appears. In this room is another machine that contains a piece of lacquer, small, dark, and triangular, just like a guitar pick. And don't think I forgot about the number of points you entered to get to this secret room. 1225, as in December 25th, Christmas, yeah. A December holiday. And the cherry on top of all of this is that when Chris actually looks at this guitar in chapter 4, what do they find? The code to the bunker. The code to the bunker that the Roaring Knight is hiding in is inside Des's guitar. Des is the Roaring Knight. But then why is she fighting us? Why is she trying to bring about the roaring, letting darkness take over the light world and letting Titans rule? Well, it all comes down to the rest of the legend of the Deltarune. Or should I say, the real legend. In chapter 4, when we enter the dark world in the church, a church that believes in the legend of the Deltarune, by the way, we encounter glass panels.
Again, that was such, like, granted, I have, like, that was such a shock when they specifically just said Deltarune in the church. Granted, it was something I remembered later on that in Undertale, they specifically point out that the Deltarune is, you know, a symbol for their religion. But the fact that, you know, that symbol is actually called the Deltarune, but the fact that they literally just said that, you know, in their opening hymn to church, it just like it was just so out of left field for me. It was so funny.
Panels that Ralsei reveals are the prophecy of the Deltarune. You'd think we already knew all of this. We were told most of it by Ralsei in chapter 1, but it turns out there's a little more to the story, and something about it wasn't sitting right with me. In the later part of the prophecy, it says this: the first hero, the cage with human souls and parts; the second hero, the girl with hope crossed on her heart; and the third hero, the prince alone in the deepest dark. And last was the girl, at last was the girl. When reading the prophecy, Susie comments on how the prince is Ralsei, the first hero is Chris, and the girl is her. That, however, didn't sit right with me because the image we have of the girl doesn't look like Susie. The image
Literally
of the
what
first
I said
hero is
earlier.
the heart, which is us and Chris being the vessel. The image of the third hero is Rolsei in a robe, but the image of the second hero is carrying a sword and wearing what looks like a gown. Susie doesn't ever really carry a sword. She's known for her axe, and she definitely hasn't worn a gown. Plus, when Susie attempts to open the dark fountain later in the chapter, all the colors were wrong. Things aren't exactly the same as the real Dark World, because though Susie knows how to open a dark fountain, she isn't the real hero spoken of in the prophecy. Susie is simply believing it must be her because Rolsei told her that she was the second hero back in the first chapter. But if I'm saying that's wrong, that Susie isn't the second hero, then there's only really one other character it can be. A girl that wears a gown, has been a member of the hero's party, and when you combine her ring of thorns that you get from her special root with a pure crystal, you get an item called the Twisted Sword. Guys, it's Noelle. Noelle has become a more significant character as the chapters have gone on, and by taking on the Snowgrave route in chapter 2, where you force Noelle to cast magic and freeze people, Noelle is becoming more confident and is gaining the ability to fight. In chapter 4, you...
Oh god, wait a second. I remember there was a meme I saw and I shared on my Discord server. Oh god, what was it? It was talking about this. Give me a second here. Oh god, that's disturbing. This was it. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I just read it here, but like, you know how the whole thing that Deltarune is an anagram of Undertale. And this little video here, if I'll play it for a second.
Snowgrave is an anagram for wrong save. Andrew Hussey's mom's maiden name is Holiday. Sans is a drug dealer. Friend inside is referring to friend possessing Dessa's corpse to become the knight. The reason why Sans has 1 HP in Undertale is because Asgard beat the shit out of him in Deltarune.
Oh god, beautiful. But yeah, exactly. Again, the fact that the weird route, what's the in-game name for when you take Noelle in chapter 2, and there's a couple of other things happening in chapter 4 that I won't talk about. But weird route being an anagram for wrong save. Oh, that has that can't be coincidence is the thing.
Also encounter these priestly figures of the Deltarune, each of them telling you a tale connected to the prophecy, and one of them says, "Who will call the girl who snows?" which is referring to what we literally do during the Spamton Neo fight. We call on Noelle's name, and she is summoned, killing Spamton with her ice magic.
And just to clarify, they're not talking about Chris calling Noelle. We're literally the one calling her, because as Noelle kind of states later on, Chris's voice and our voice, or the voice we use in game, are two different things. And if you go on the weird route, Chris absolutely hates us. Cue the scene, cue the garbage can scene.
In another part of the prophecy, it says, "Love finds its way to the girl." The image here is the same as the second hero, but it has a heart like ours inside it. On a more innocent level, this could be referring to Noelle's crush that she has on Susie, but given all the references to the Snowgrave route that we've already had, I believe there's a darker meaning behind this. In Undertale, we were taught about the love stat. When we kill enemies, our love increases, but the stat actually stands for level of violence. During the Snowgrave route, Noelle was pushed to become more violent, and the level of violence found its way to her. And this is made super clear in chapter 4. If you've taken the Snowgrave route in chapter 2, you will receive a unique cutscene in chapter 4 when Chris and Susie are in Noelle's house. After trying to find the bunker code in the old guitar, Chris pulls out the heart and stuffs it into a drawer. It's at this point that we start behaving real sus and vent. While moving around the vents, we can hear a conversation between Chris and Noelle. She says that last night she saw Chris, the real Chris, who told her that everything was all okay. Until our heart makes its way back into Chris, and the entire conversation shifts as we prove to Noelle that the events of chapter 2 weren't a dream like she thought. Chris then puts the thorn ring back onto Noelle's finger, and when we do, a red crack appears on the screen.
Which, okay, on release, it was different. It was a rose petal. There was a rose dying. Then after people got weird about it, it became just a dot, and now it's the crack. If I remember correctly, there are people theorizing that this is actually a soul, like another red soul growing in Noelle. So whether that means, like, we'll eventually, like, transfer control from Chris to Noelle, or, like, another soul will start controlling her instead, like, again, weird route. It, as the name implies, is very weird.
This moment is us, the heart. We are the ones trying to control Noelle, forcing her to use her magic, helping her to find her level of violence. And as chapter 4 continues, we see these actions take effect. In the Dark World, when Susie goes ahead, Ralsei suggests instead of us going on ahead, we think of someone. If we choose to think of Noelle, the screen turns black and a small red dot with the words "thank you" appears. Then at the very end of chapter 4, the screen fades to black and once again the red dot appears, but this time it's bigger. The red dot is Noelle's heart forming, love finding its way to the girl, just as the prophecy said it would. All of this is pointing to Noelle, and more specifically, the Snowgrave route being part of the prophecy. The Snowgrave route is the canon series of events. Even though it felt like it was a decision we were able to make, Toby Fox is once again showing us that it was destined to be. This is also why the Night Death is trying to bring about the Roaring. The Roaring is what will summon the heroes and force them to banish the angels' heaven, banish us. Just like Chris, they want us gone so that their sister is left alone and safe, which explains why we see both of those characters working together throughout the chapters. Chris receives some mysterious messages from their phone, which are implied to actually be the Knight. And if you manage to defeat the Knight at the end of chapter 3, they will literally knight Chris. Chris wants us removed from their body, but they also clearly hate what we are doing to Noelle.
And I will just, okay, because, like, they're being a bit vague here, but the normal route and the weird route are two separate things. You can only do the weird route if you started doing all that weird stuff with Noelle in chapter 2. If you don't and just play normally, you continue normally. So, and in that route, it does seem that, well, I mean, obviously Chris still wants us out of their body, rightfully so. It seems like they actually like going on the adventures with Susie and stuff like that because, you know, we're not forcing them to do horrible things to their friends.
Putting us in a trash can and kicking the living daylights out of us after we put the thorn.
Yeah, that's the scene I was talking about.
It's their goal to bring about the Roaring and force us, the angel, away from them and the lives of their friends. But then, where does all of that leave our monster girl Susie? Is she just gonna get sidelined? Not exactly. In chapter 3, when you're allowed to play the 8-bit minigame, there is a secret ice palace you can travel to. On the door is the Deltarune symbol, but
I just realized it's not centered. And also, it has 4 arrows. What?
it's slightly different to what you might remember. It's pretty hard to see because, well, it's 8-bit, but the symbol actually has 4 triangles on it instead of the usual 3. Before now, we believed the 3 triangles represented Chris, Susie, and Ralsei, the 3 heroes. But now we're being shown 4 people are a part of this, and that's actually reflected in the prophecy too. It's just that Susie, and by association we, have been conflating 2 parts of it. The girl that Susie believes to be her is mentioned twice in the prophecy, once as the second hero, and the second time at the end. At last was the girl. This is a list of characters. First the vessel, second the girl, third the prince, and then last is another girl.
Okay, honestly, I had not noticed that before. I honestly had not.
There are 2 separate girls in this prophecy.
Susie is
and if
a part
you
of the
look
prophecy.
into the game files, the image used behind the final girl is labeled Rude Buster. Rude Buster is a move unique to Susie, so though she may not be named as one of the 3 heroes, she clearly has something important to do with the prophecy. And I think I know what that role is. You see, in chapter 4, Ralsei confesses to Susie that he was intentionally keeping part of the prophecy a secret. Susie manages to get ahead and read it, but before we are able to read it, Susie smashes the glass and starts laughing. She says that she or Chris would never let that happen. Whatever is on that last panel was something that Ralsei was worried about Susie and Chris seeing, and clearly it has an effect on Susie. Throughout the chapters, Susie has always struggled to accept reality, constantly denying whatever is being said and wanting to forge her own path. But this time feels different. It's not an angry defiance. It's uncomfortable, like, haha, but that's not gonna happen, right? And then she quickly tries to change the subject. So what did it say? Well, the lines before this talk about a final tragedy unveiling, meaning that whatever the destroyed panel said is revealing that tragedy. The ultimate tragedy that I could think of, one that would definitely make Susie uncomfortable, would be the death of a beloved character. And I believe that character is Susie herself. I mean, at the very end of the chapter, she starts to tell Chris how she really feels. And it feels very finite, almost like it's her ending monologue, her coming to terms with the reality that is set before her. Like she's going to die and is letting Chris know how she really feels and how she doesn't want to move on. Ralsei is also acting sketchy throughout both of these new chapters. Not only are they hesitant whenever Susie brings up the prophecy, but Ralsei also makes a point to always talk to Chris about how nice Susie is. He even does it directly after Susie smashes the glass. And I always thought that was a little suspicious. Obviously, one of the reasons Ralsei is doing this is because they know what we know. Susie isn't one of the heroes. He jumped the gun when Susie arrived and made an assumption only to realize it wasn't correct. And
the whole thing is he specifically says earlier that, he knows the entire prophecy and seemingly is actively trying to make sure it doesn't come to pass, at least not the bad parts.
that she is instead the second girl mentioned. But the real reason he's acting so strange, I suspect, is because Ralsei knows of Susie's fate, that she isn't long for this world, and so he's trying to make sure however long she has left is an enjoyable experience, rather than us ruining it by favoring Noelle over her. And actually, Noelle is a big reason why I think Susie has to die. Remember, this tragedy leads us to banishing the angel's heaven, which, as we spoke about in a previous theory, is the good ending here. We are the angel and our actions are bad for these characters, as we've seen play out with Noelle. And actually, Noelle growing in her levels of violence leads me to believe that we, the players, are growing her powers in order that during the final battle, the angelic-looking Noelle will become the perfect vessel for us to use in order to control everything and everyone. But I also believe Susie, despite not being one of the main three, is the one that's going to save Noelle, and in the end, the entire world. In Chapter 4, Chris has a moment of playing the piano. Chris is actually great at playing the piano. We see it referenced time and time again throughout.
We just never see it because Chris doesn't want to do it when we tell them to.
Out the game, but while we are in control of them, they suddenly suck because we cannot play piano. However, during Chapter 4, Susie calls Chris by their name and tells them to play very sincerely, which leads to Chris, for a brief moment, gaining back control and playing without our inputs. Now, we know that Chris can rip out our heart and take back control of their body at any moment, but that is not what happens here, and that's why it's so special. Chris is able to gain back control while we are still inside of Chris. Susie's kind and authentic words had the ability to tear Chris away from our control. And
okay, there is something here, because, like, throughout the entire game, it's depicted that while we do, control Chris's actions, our control isn't perfect. Like, on top of many other things, Chris doesn't play the piano because, as I said, they don't want to do it because we tell them to. In fact, in this chapter, Chapter 4, whenever you do a wrong note, there's like on that one piano, there's a specific note that's played like clank, like, a literal wrong note. And that one singular wrong note is actually in the Deltarune official soundtrack, and it's called, is it called like Your Concert? Or Your Own Concert? Wait, let me double check this. Yeah, no, that's it, Concert for You, and this is it right here. That's literally it. That is the concert that Chris is willing to do for us. A single sour note. We may have control over Chris, but our control is very much in the style of an Atari-style joystick with a single button. Like, we do not have finite control. We just tell them what to do. They do everything else themselves.
And I believe that Susie is going to be able to do the same thing for Noelle. However, Noelle is clearly far more powerful than Chris. That's the whole point of the Snowgrave route, making her stronger, which means it's going to take something much bigger to move Noelle. But we do know that Noelle has a massive crush on Susie, so seeing her die while under our control because of our control, I suspect that will be enough to pull Noelle back to reality, out of our control, so that the three heroes, Chris, Noelle, and Rolsei, can banish us for good. Now, the prophecy follows a classic AABBC rhyming scheme, and lines 1, 3, and 5 use 10 syllables, while lines 2 and 4 use 8. So while this next bit is purely conjecture, I'm going to put some money on the prophecy going a little something like this. And then, when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the world, there is only one way. The girl's death breaks the angel's sway. Only then will the worlds be saved. I'll admit, a lot of this is on the more speculative side, but what an awesome story arc it would be for Susie. The class bully turned into a selfless warrior, willing to do whatever it takes to save the world. Although it would also mean her losing one of the character traits that makes her so unique. Susie is constantly defiant, attacking when we don't tell her to, moving around without our inputs. But if she does sacrifice herself for the good of the world, then she's just like Chris, the Knight, Noelle, Rolsei, even us, who are just following a set path that Toby Fox has pre-planned. Then again, I suppose that's kind of been the point from the start, hasn't it? But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna say it. I liked this video. It was a good one. And even then, like, that whole thing, the fact that, you know, that girl portion was separate from the second hero, suggesting that there's 4 people. And the fact that the title is called Rude Buster. I mean, I'm gonna believe it. I mean, I'm going to hope something different happens. Like, I could very much believe that Susie dying, if she is to die, would happen during the weird route. But what's going to happen during the normal route? Because, again, we're not making Noelle stronger there. And we're going to have to see, because we have, you know, about a year before Chapter 5 comes out, and hopefully we get more answers then, but until then, it's definitely going to be weird. But yeah, that's definitely going to be it for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.